already buying into this ideology. So let's go to Tim Burchett on Fox News earlier today, and here's what he had to say.
I think about this great country and where we've come and how we're just going to give it away without a shot being fired. And that's exactly what's happened in the Democrat Party. And honestly, in the Republican Party, if we're going to start playing ball with these far leftists, I'm still friends with them. I'm friends with AOC. I pray for her, but I don't agree with the dadgum thing she says, ma'am, and I never will. We better stand up for this Constitution or we're going to lose it. We will lose it in these midterms because that is where the Democrat Party is headed. That's where their leadership is going. Hakeem Jeffries, he's making some lame statements about this. All he wants to do is stay in power, and he will move to the left because that's what you saw with AOC.
But see, the problem is not necessarily people like Hakeem Jeffries who are literally shapeshifters. The problem is there are people winning elections, as I said earlier, who really believe in this way of thinking. Let's go to another socialist Democrat here who's a candidate for Congress. In this interview that she does, she's literally suggesting that 9/11 was not only justified, but it's something that was bound to happen anyway. Take a look.
Do you believe that the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America were the inevitable consequence of American foreign policy?
Inevitable in the sense that we destabilized a lot of the Middle East, that forced people to believe that another act of violence was the only response. And again, just like I said before, our responsibility is to getting rid of those conditions that lead to violence in the first place.
So let's zoom out and look at some numbers from Kalshi.com to see how what we're talking about right now will have major implications on the midterm elections in November. According to Kalshi.com, it says, which party will win the U.S. House? 81%. Right now, at this moment, it leans to the Democrat Party. And if you go to who will win the U.S. Senate, right now Republicans are sitting at approximately 59%. So according to the prediction markets, it's going to be an interesting election to say the least. And if you want to trade on these particular events, use my promo code DeVory. They'll give you a $10 credit on your first $100, or just go to Cal Fair to criticize them and how they see it. You know, I don't think that really is the biggest indictment on them. I would argue trying to abolish ICE and prisons and defund the police might be one of the biggest ones, and you know, buying into socialism is probably the biggest one. So you know, it is what it is, but that's a quick look into their psyche, right? And so you may still be thinking, well, I'm not noticing any Democrat socialists in my area. Oh, trust me, they exist, and some of them are already running for election, whether that is in Congress or in local office. You have to be paying attention here. Now let's go to House Speaker Mike Johnson, because here's what he had to say about everything that's been taking place.
Only 29% of Democrat voters now say they are proud to be American. Over half now say they want to live in another country. I am very bullish about the midterms. Let me just tell you right now, as leader of this little army in the House, we are ready for this fight. We're ready for this fight. We're called for it. This is a midterm unlike any other, not only because of the threats that we face that are very real and must be confronted, but it's because of a lot of reasons on paper why we should win. I could do this with you all day, talking about the 700 bills we passed through the House, the 100 executive orders we've codified, and all the great things we've done for hardworking American families, and pro-family policies and pro-life policies, and we're fulfilling our promises. They are on the verge of an open civil war because the establishment Democrats are being pushed out by the Marxists.
Well, the thing about all of this is that if you are a Republican strategist, I mean, I'd like to imagine that you're probably at least a little bit encouraged about the midterms, because Democrats are still all over the place. I mean, they're anti-Trump. That is their message. They're fighting it out with Democrat Socialists of America. No one trusts them except on health care and cost of living. I mean, you know, those are like literally the only two issues. Everything else is an advantage for the Republican Party. So all the Republicans need to do, if they can finally do it, is deliver tangible results that families are talking about at the kitchen table. You know, will they be able to do that? My hope is the answer is yes, but only the outcomes will show that.
They're having a lot of disarray on their side, and that will play to our advantage in the midterms. We have, for the first time in 10 years, my friends, we have a slight fundraising advantage over the Democrats. That never happens. They're so motivated, and we have the President of the United States running like it's 2024, okay? Without doing campaigns and rallies, you need to look right into the eyes of the camera and say, I am on the ballot, because in a real sense, he is. If we were to lose the midterms, heaven forbid, these Democrats Y'all, impeachment's not even the big concern. They will turn every committee of Congress into an investigative body, and they'll go after the president's family, the cabinet, his donors and friends. Half of you in this room will be targeted.
And that's not a hyperbolic statement. It is a reality. This is why I don't understand the discourse online, because for everything that we may disagree with this current administration on regarding Iran and other things, is it in the end worth the squeeze? Meaning, is all this fighting that you see about what this administration is doing, is it worth us putting ourselves in a position where we will be targeted again, where we will be silenced again, where the government will mandate things again? And I guess what will have to happen is, if that scenario plays out, then people will realize, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't that bad. To socialism. So you got to wake up, pay attention, make sure in your local area, in your local elections, you don't have candidates like this getting a chance. Elections, you don't have candidates like this.
Have been waiting to interview this young lady. She's absolutely phenomenal. Wait till I show you the clip that really made me want to interview her. But I got to give a quick rundown of who she is. Her name is Dee Foster. She is a communication strategist, PR expert, writer. She works with Chad O. Jackson. She helped them with the Martin Luther King Project, the documentary, a docu-series that they put out, which was absolutely incredible. But here's the part that's incredible to me. 17-time first-team All-American gymnast, and the first black gymnast at the University of Alabama. Absolutely incredible. But let me show y'all the clip real quick, because I didn't know who Dee was at first, and then I saw this clip and I said, I have to interview her. I know that she's brilliant. Then I found all these wonderful things out about her afterwards. But let's play the clip that I saw first for Dee, and then we're going to get into it.
The black community is doing so much worse now than we were even like 15 minutes after slavery.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. There was a thriving black community in the days after slavery. Hi, Frederick Douglass. In the days before the civil rights movement, there were, more businesses owned, more homes owned. Family unit was intact, a mom and a dad in the home. Children children being raised in the church, the faith in the God of the Bible was paramount, and the sort of the crucible of how families even came to be in the Black community, right? Like that was the common denominator was the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Now y'all know why I'm interviewing her, right? After listening to that, it couldn't have been said better. Help me welcome to the show, Dee Foster.
Hey, Brandon, thanks so much for having me on.
Well, it is my pleasure. I'm so excited to talk to you. It's good to talk to people that have common sense, that's willing to stand up for truth. And you are one of those individuals. And I want to talk about this idea based on what you said. You know, there's this idea, I think, from the community, and Black community, and also the white community that have a lot of white guilt. They tend to skip over generations of Black people and the Black experience in America. Can you talk to us about that? Because you mentioned a little bit in the clip how they just go all the way, they jump over all of the Black success that have happened after slavery to just go back to slavery. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, that was an interview I did with 1819 News and Brian Dawson. And that, you know, we were talking really about the fact that this all started because a Black publication in Birmingham had put me in the publication in kind of a roundup story about Black women who have done a bunch of really good things in the state of Alabama. And one of the people they featured was a dude pretending to be a woman. And I lost it and I went all the way off. So that's even why I was doing that interview. And I think to your point, you know, what's popular in the culture is to be as victimized and marginalized as the narrative will allow, right? And so we have all of these contributors to that narrative. We have people who are dependent on the government and have been so generationally. And then we have white liberals who aid and abet that, right? We've had a lot of, you know, especially, you know, it's really starting in 2020, this thing really escalated. The dude who died of the fentanyl overdose, everybody really used that as an excuse to pretend that Black people just can't get a leg up. And I know from my personal experience, that's not my lived experience, right? I've had a very good experience in terms of being able to nurture my gifts, have them nurtured by people, have them developed by people. When someone spotted when I was 4 years old that I had a talent to be upside down and be on my hands and do gymnastics, people kind of swooped in and said, it's our responsibility to nurture this child. It wasn't about my skin color. It wasn't about anything to do with any immutable characteristic. It was about the talent. And the talent was God-given. And so I was very fortunate to have a mom and parents who said, your talent is not your own. This was given to you. It is our responsibility to steward that and to make sure that you are, you know, with the best coaches in the country who can also help you steward it. So this was my experience. And every single one of my coaches was white. Every single one of the judges who judged me, white. I was never discriminated against. I didn't, you know, in arguably the whitest sport in America. I was never discriminated against, right? Like there's like gymnastics and figure skating are probably the two whitest sports. And I didn't have a problem. In fact, I had a very opposite experience in that my coaches pushed me hard, not because I was Black, but because they said, she's got the thing, like she's got that gift, she's got the talent. We have to develop this as far as it can go. And judges did the same thing. They were hard on me, not because I was Black, but because they saw potential in me and they wanted me to not sort of skate by just on raw talent alone, but to actually develop that gift into a skill. So I don't, you know, this whole, and that continued also, Brandon, in my professional life. You know, when I first got into communications, right out of, people just pushed me. And it was not because of the color of my skin. They didn't, you know, move away from me because of the color of my skin or say, you can't do this profession because you're Black and most Black people don't do this. These are not conversations I had. These are not the kind of people that were around me. I will say that you attract what you think about. So if you're thinking victim, if you're thinking marginalized, if you're thinking I can't get a leg up, if you're thinking the white man has his foot on my neck, you're going to draw that to you. I'm not saying that white people are doing that en masse. I'm saying that you're going to draw sort of that marginalized experience. You're going to draw a victim experience into your life. So I just, you know, I grew up, you know, listening to people like Bear Bryant, you know, like, I ain't nothing but a winner. I ain't never been nothing but a winner. So that's kind of like my energy. That's my vibe.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because I've been arguing with Ari Spears, the comedian. That guy, he was in my DM yesterday cussing and acting crazy. And he's mad because I'm not a victim. I haven't been discriminated against in my life that I know of. Maybe somebody did behind my back. Who cares? If I don't notice it, it must not even be effective. And I have a similar experience as you, but I grew up in an all-black neighborhood. But still, there were white coaches and people who poured into me. When I went to college, there were white people that poured into me. One of the most pivotal people that had an impact in my life, named John. He was a white guy. He helped me, when my kid was very young. He paid for my kid to go to college anywhere he wanted when he graduated high school. I mean, this guy decided to look out for me, not because I was a black guy. And all that I have done in my life, all of my successes have come from being a good person and not necessarily because of the color of my skin, because I have good black people that I work with and I have good white people that I work with. And the people are putting the lenses of racism on and the lenses of victimhood. And like you said, you see it everywhere when you're wearing the lenses. I mean, somebody can be upset with you and flip you off at the stoplight, and if you got the lens of racism on, you think it's because you're black. You think it's because they're racist, not just because they're a-hole. And so, but here's the thing that I want to hear from you on too is that you mentioned this gap between black people now and then slavery. There was this middle part where I felt like a lot of it's statistically proven. Black people had a tremendous amount of acceleration and success after slavery was abolished, after they were freed. Madam C.J. Walker was one of them. I mean, I know she's one of the most famous, but like what late 1800s, early 1900s, she was the first female millionaire. I mean, you have Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. You have, you can go down the list, Harlem. All of these black successes, for some reason, black people that are victims, they look over this. Can you explain this period of time and how black people were successful?
Well, I mean, being a victim is very profitable today. That's the truth. I mean, it's, there's a greater payoff to keep dragging the past into the present and hurling it toward the future. There's a greater payoff for some people to do that rather than to actually apply themselves to a skill, discover what God-given gifts they've been given, because everyone has been given some God-given gifts, usually more than one. But it's easier to sort of rest on the laurels of, if I complain enough, if I join this group enough, if I act, bliggity enough, I said what I said, if I engage in all of this sort of nefarious activity and pretend that I'm suffering the same kinds of things that people in Frederick Douglass's era suffered, then I'm going to get free stuff. I'm going to get a break when I screw up. I'm going to be able to screw up as much as I want to and not suffer any consequences. I think there's a couple things that are really at play and kind of at the foundation of that mentality, that where the gap is ignored, the gap where black people were thriving, black people were homeowners, black people were getting married, having children, successful families. They were God-fearing. They were going to church, and not just going to church. They were living out the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like, they were walking in authority in the earth, right? Ignoring that gap is profitable for black people, some black people. And unfortunately, I personally believe that it's a large majority of the 13%, which is extraordinarily sad. But there's a couple things that are at play. There's no fear of God. There's no fear of consequences. And I personally also believe that the rise of the matriarchy, the rise of feminism, is very much at the root. We are now for the very first time, the very first fatherless generation who are now young adults, and they were all raised by women who hate men. This is a phenomenon. This has never happened before. And it is it's this ethnicity where it is the most prevalent and where it is the most pronounced. And I believe that sort of the cycle that people keep sort of going in and out of, right? Where there's government dependency, where there's way too many women raising boys, and I'm talking about like a gaggle of geese, like a hen house, and there's one boy or two boys, and there's no male influence. There's no alpha male influence. And I'm talking about biblical alpha male. I just did a post about this. That is really sort of permeating the culture. But not just the black culture. It's permeating every culture. It's permeating society. It's permeating this country. And so I'm concerned that this what sort of maybe began as the civil rights movement, which was a farce, which was a fraud,
You will arrive at your
which was
destination
a
at 5:02
Marxist
a.m.
a Marxist ideology permeating the government and the country. That in and of itself is, the most inauspicious beginnings of what we're seeing today. But I think now there's been sort of like, it's like a wild hare at this point. Like people are we're careening off a mountain with this at this point. People do not care at all about their decisions having consequences for other people. They don't care. That's why you're able to see wanton murder, wanton assault. Just absolutely recklessness and carelessness for the human condition. That is happening now in the Black community. And it's making me wonder if was there like a kill switch in the jab? Like what is actually happening here? Because this is not normal behavior.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to kind of the residual effect of not having a father, strong leadership. Because I figured this a while ago. What happens is that if you don't have a dad as a young girl, right, and you grow up in the house with your mama, and a lot of times, I don't know. I'm not a girl, so I don't know, but this is just my opinion. A lot of times mama and daughter bump heads. And that's why, having a father gives that balance. So mama and daughter bumping heads. Daughter has never seen what a real man look like. Daughter has only seen what mama's imagination of a man is in her mind that she's never been able to capture anyway. So a young lady grow up resenting the fact she has no dad, resenting men just as well as her mom resents men. And then you grow up thinking, I don't need a man, I'm independent. And that young lady goes out and lives that out. And then she ends up with men who she hate because he has to be a beta male to even want to deal with that. Or she's with no man, but she's sexually active with men. Therefore, then she have children. And then when you have a boy, as a woman who hates men, I don't need a man, you have a boy, and you have never been able to capture a good man, and you've never seen one, you create this fake man in your mind, and you try to make your son that fake man. The one that's gangster, but he's also a doctor. You know what I'm saying? All this old crazy stuff that's unimaginable. And then that young man grows up. He doesn't have a dad. He never had a man tell him, I love you, I'm proud of you. Then he becomes to try to get validation from other things, either gangs, violence, trying to prove himself. And all of those things continue to matriculate through the community over time. And I think it's just destructive. And we're seeing it, just like you said earlier, we're seeing it. These YNs going out here doing takeovers. And before we get back to the show, I want to tell you guys about Shenergy.
After all they've been through, is there any group of people with more swag than Black Americans?
Black folks keep saving this country, keep putting their lives on the line to save this country.
America doesn't deserve the grace we continuously give it.
Many blacks today egotistically and really naively take pride in the fact that they belong to a race that they believe laid the blueprint for how activism should be done in America.
Our generation was not good business people. That's not what we did. We were good civil rights people.
We've always been the glue that kept this country together.
And they do this for no other reason than the fact that the presumptive head of the civil rights movement happened to be a black man, Martin Luther King.
Stanley Levison was always in his ear. Always in his ear.
Levison was a secular Jew who was committed to the idea of social justice. He wrote everything that MLK said publicly.
I have a brief statement that I will read.
The sermons have been published in book form under the titles Stride Toward Freedom and Strength.
He ghostwrote every book and article published under King's name.
Dr. King knew that Stanley was a communist, but since he too shared in Levison's Marxist sensibilities, he was all too willing to accept the leadership of Levison.
I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation.
Our leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Our leader, Dr. King.
Our leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Dr. King was our leader.
He was a pastor, right?
Marxists wrote King's speeches so well that even conservatives were duped.
The I Have a Dream speech, right? One of the great speeches in American rhetorical history.
He supported these ideas, particularly of the founders in the Declaration of Independence.
Reverend King, I'd like to prevail on you in behalf of my wife, my 2 young daughters, and myself, who are trying to operate a business here, to encourage your nonviolent army to peacefully solicit some other property other than mine.
I'm not going to be begging to give you my money. If you look at your Bible in the book of Corinthians, 11 people will not ever enter the kingdom of heaven, and one is extortion.
We have some
dear white friends here who are with us, and we want to eat together.
What's the extortion? Use stress, intimidation to get what they want. What was the civil rights movement?
Freedom only comes through consistent agitation.
Threats, coercion.
Just giving the Negro an equal break is not enough.
I'm gonna bring the government down there and put a gun to your head.
We still have Martin Luther King holiday in America. Every major city has a Martin Luther King Boulevard.
The downfall of blacks has more to do with a mindset shift that was brought about by political rhetoric than anything else.
The civil rights leaders were making us believe as black folks that white ICE is colder.
Privileged classes never give up their privileges without strong resistance. Freedom is never given to anybody. It is not done voluntarily, but it is done through the pressure that comes about from people who are oppressed. The oppressor has you in domination because he plans to keep you there, and he never voluntarily gives it up. That is where the strong...
Previously in episode 7, we exposed how the civil rights movement's moral glow concealed a Marxist undercurrent. We traced how Martin King was not an independent reformer guided by scripture, but rather a willing, crafted instrument and a political strategy born of Marxist materialism and shaped in the discipline of the Hegelian dialectic. Although they were veterans of communist strategy on the one hand and contributors to many of King's sermons on the other, King's handlers, Stanley Levison and Bayard Rustin, did not serve two masters. They served but one, the revolutionary vision of Karl Marx. And Marx, according to his very own poems and diaries, served Satan. Their mission was to use the church and a willing minister within it to advance the cause of the lesser master, the one that Christ defeated. As he relates to Hegelian dialectic, King became the dialectical figure, the synthesis, in a struggle where biblical truth represented the thesis and Marxist ideology represented the antithesis. Through him, they could merge the language of Christianity with the logic of revolution. Episode 7 made it clear what looked like a moral crusade was in reality a tactical application of Marxist principles, conflict used as a means of social revolution. Every protest, every headline, every appeal to justice was part of the dialectic. Create tension, provoke reaction, then offer revolution as the resolution. We also landed the plane on the celebrated Montgomery bus boycott, long portrayed as a dawn of Black economic empowerment. In truth, it was never really about local stewardship or pulling resources within the community. It was about federal empowerment, an engineered crisis that invited Washington, D.C.'s meddlesome hand into local life, transferring moral and financial authority away from the local people and toward the centralized state, trading the tyrannical Jim Crow laws of the state, which were already on their way out, for the tyrannical authority of the federal government. The boycott didn't build independence. We explored other strange bedfellows of King's, men like Harry Belafonte, Jack O'Dell, and James Baldwin, men who we have been conditioned to believe were extraordinary thinkers, artists, and writers, but who, conversely, were really atheists and socialist radicals. I think we demonstrated in no uncertain terms that from the very beginning, this was a movement led by men who were rebelliously hostile toward the Spirit of God. The pulpit, once devoted to salvation, had become a platform for Marxist revolution within the so-called Black church. Yet, even amid that deception, there were men who saw right through it. Dr. Joseph H. Jackson, whom we introduced in episode 7, recognized the fingerprints of Marx all over Martin Luther King's campaign. He understood that the so-called social gospel was no gospel at all, but a political counterfeit dressed in Christian language. And Jackson was not alone. Across the nation, pastors and laymen alike resisted the intrusion of worldly ideology into Christian theology, defending the faith once delivered to the saints, as Spurgeon did in his day, while others kneeled to the spirit of the age. Episode 7 revealed that the real battle was never simply about civil rights. It was about the authority of Christ versus the authority of the state, the eternal gospel versus the social gospel, and the men who were courageous enough to call that distinction out. In this next episode, we'll uncover how King's movement sought to topple Joseph H. Jackson, how the National Baptist Convention, the organization over which Jackson presided, became the next target in this Marxist campaign, and how Jackson's stand for biblical truth became the last bulwark before the so-called Black church fell to political religion.
The Democratic Party has asked me to be the opening preacher tonight for the convention. Come on, y'all ain't saying nothing.
This episode is the story of the pastor who saw the plan and refused to kneel, using his voice and his platform to calm the anger incited by those who sought to sow discord. Episode 8 of the MLK Project, Motives Unmasked.
The Communist Party does not reply in kind to the furious diatribes directed against us by reactionary clergy. As their links with fascism become clearer, they are doomed to repudiation by their very own flocks. Browder.
In 1953, the National Baptist Convention elected its new president, Dr. Joseph H. Jackson.
Extended jubilant congratulations to its pastor, Dr. J.H. Jackson, new president of the National Baptist Convention.
Joseph H. Jackson was born in the year of 1900, which would have made him 15 years old when Booker T. Washington died. His experience growing up as a black man in the South before the height of Jim Crow is worth looking into.
I saw the lynching parties of white folks looking for Negro victims. Our father taught us not to be bitter children, yet we were. We worked with our hands in the cotton fields. When the white landowner would ride through, we children would stop working. We stopped out of resentment for his presence. We wouldn't hit a lick. I had to gradually outgrow that. When I went to college, I saw many fine, upstanding Negro teachers, stately people who were not bitter. I found many white fellows failing in college, and I felt sympathy for some of them. I found they were not the superior creatures they told us they were. Joseph Harrison Jackson.
Jackson grew up on his father's farm in the rural Deep South in Rudyard, Mississippi. For Jackson, his faith has always been a very integral part of his existence.
Rudyard represents a scene in the occasion of my beginning as a Christian. I was converted here as a child, accepted the Christ way of life as the way of salvation, and for the first time, learned to rely on the love of God in Christ Jesus for salvation, for guidance, and for the hope of eternal life. The rudiments of the Christian faith were taught by humble parents, by rural district preachers, and by farmers who gave only part of their time to the work of the Christian ministry. I soon fell in love with the Bible as the holy book and read it constantly and daily for light, knowledge, spiritual nurture, strength, and spiritual growth. It was in these circumstances, in these surroundings, that I was called to preach and embraced my life's work. Jackson.
He died in 1990, the same year that I was born. And so with the 20th century being arguably the most subversive century in American history, it's safe to say that Joseph H. Jackson seen it all.
And I have written a peace plan in the light of the things that we have worked together and thought together on.
Although he's relegated to a footnote now and nobody knows his name, Jackson was the most popular black pastor in the world for the better part of the 20th century.
Jackson became not just nationally prominent, I mean, he was internationally famous. He traveled all over the world, given the key to the city of Tel Aviv. He was present at the Second Vatican Council.
He even bravely went to the Soviet Union, to Moscow, to preach the gospel to communists.
Unlike King and the other civil rights leaders who were constantly looking for areas of disagreement between blacks and whites to exploit by protesting and lobbying the government, Jackson was a problem solver in the same vein as Booker T. Washington. His focus was finding creative and industrious ways for blacks to be empowered at the ground level, irrespective of their situation. An example of this is how he responded when government decisions caused a schism between farmers and sharecroppers, both black and white.
Howard Jones, a grower in Florida, was asked if he knew what his beans, picked that day, would bring in the market.
Well, you can't tell from one day to another. Some days you'll go down there and you'll get $5. Now, I've seen them drop to $1.50 the next day. Or one day they'll be $3, and the next day they might be $2, or one day they'll be $2, and the next day they could be $4.
Who sets your price?
Well, that's what we're all trying to figure out.
Government tampering in agriculture, dating as far back as the early 1900s, resulted in catastrophic adverse effects for both farmers and sharecroppers alike.
What percentage of the sharecroppers do you figure got gypped?
In order to evade responsibility, the government simply blamed the farmers, which naturally caused friction between sharecroppers and farmers.
The sharecroppers didn't get a nickel of the benefit payments. The landlords pocketed them all. But actually, back of it,
Joseph H. Jackson shrewdly understood that the problem wasn't the landlord or the farmer, but the agitative rhetoric of so-called progressives and government meddling. Jackson knew that this created a ripe opportunity for communists to swoop in and organize and unionize the sharecroppers, not because they cared about them, but because they wanted to exploit their situation for their own cause, and that this would basically leave the sharecroppers in a worse situation than before. Understanding how counterproductive it would be to organize a movement of sharecroppers to protest the government, the National Baptist Convention, under Jackson's leadership, decided to buy farmland in the South. They allowed the sharecroppers to work the land rent-free under the condition that they were putting enough money away to eventually buy their own farmland, and so they can have their own property. These are the kind of things that Joseph H. Jackson did because he was all about empowering the individual to be a person of virtue and substance. And most importantly, he was about teaching and preaching the gospel, calling on folks to repent and to embrace new life in Christ. This is probably the most important part of the story, since it is here that we get insight into the motives behind King's rise in popularity, as well as the murmurings of Marxists and enemies of the gospel concerning King. By the mid-50s, communists had a very active stronghold in many churches and seminaries, and they quickly took notice of King's potential in furthering their agenda.
There's on the city bus lines of Montgomery have been humiliated and
They saw in King someone who had a very natural, charismatic, yet calm personality and superb oratory skills. An interesting piece to take note of from Professor Enslin's letter of recommendation for King to the Dean of Boston University is when he said King is president of the student government and has conducted himself well in this position. He noted that with Crozier's student body being largely Southern in constitution, that a colored man should be elected to and popular in such a position is in itself no mean recommendation. Professor Enslin recognized that King's Southern charm won him the support of white Southerners and black Southerners alike. This excited Enslin, who himself wrote extensively about the need for a new biblical orthodoxy, and he saw in King a proponent who would help bring that about. This is why Enslin said that it is more than an even chance that one is adequately trained as King will find ample opportunity for useful service. At the same time that this letter was being written, up in New York, Stanley Levison, who was an atheist, a secularist, and a communist, was working with a publication called The Churchman. Levison, just like many communists, took an interest in the church and in Christianity because up until that point they've had some success in manipulating churchgoers into joining their cause. Understanding that the true gospel is a threat to the spread of communism, Stanley, along with other communists, figured out that getting into Christian publications, seminaries, and churches in order to bastardize the gospel was an effective strategy for them. However, in the same way that Marx and Engels saw Charles Spurgeon as a thorn in their side in the 19th century, Stanley and the communists saw Joseph H. Jackson and his popularity over Black American churchgoers as a problem that needed to be done away with.
I looked forward to a time when I could use these skills not for myself, but for socially constructive ends. The liberation struggle is the most positive and rewarding area of work anyone could experience. So the skills I learn in basically destructive activity are employed here in constructive effort. Levison to King, 1959.
Our hope is then to get released in America the moral principles of Jesus Christ. He has the answer.
Jackson, whose only agenda was to preach the gospel with no ulterior motive, was the president of the largest black church organization in the world in a time when the civil rights movement was at its peak. This posed a threat to the Marxist agenda, and so they resolved to infiltrate and subvert it.
The church must go deeper than politics and deal with the peril and the
I
problem.
am of the belief that Joseph H. Jackson from the beginning could smell a rat. He could see what was going on. One thing that he did not agree with was the tactic of nonviolence.
There is a conspiracy, deep and dangerous, designed to demoralize the nation, to divide us, and if possible, to conquer us.
I have been greatly influenced by Gandhi, and I say often that I received the inspiration to carry on in the nonviolent tradition from Jesus of Nazareth and the operational technique from Mahatma Gandhi.
Gandhi's tactic of nonviolence.
In India, millions of people demonstrated their impassioned protest.
The point of it was to get rid of the British Empire. Joseph H. Jackson saw nonviolence as a tactic being used in the long run to overthrow or to remove altogether the United States.
Dr. J.H. Jackson, head of the largest Negro church organization in America, the National Baptist Convention USA, with nearly 7 million members, has warned constantly that communists are directing the revolutionary activities of the civil rights movement in America.
Part of the strategy to infiltrate the National Baptist Convention was to oust Joseph H. Jackson as president and to elect instead Gardner C. Taylor, who was a proponent of the so-called social gospel, as the president.
As president of the National Baptist Convention, the largest organization of Negroes in the world, I believe, I'm firmly convinced that the convention has to give its full and unqualified support to every creative attempt to resolve the problem of race and to actualize our democracy right now in America.
The elements outside the church, i.e. the civil rights movement, wanted the National Baptist Convention to exist to serve the radicals.
I cannot see how we can afford to retreat from law and order if we do not get the things that we want now.
So Joseph H. Jackson, the point of the church was just that. The church was the church.
I don't think that a minister ought to try to be a professional politician. If he does, he's restricted to that party. He has to do what the party tells him. There has to be some voices that are not limited to politics, that a man says what he believes irrespective.
The Marxists understood that if they can take Stanley Levison's group of Marxist ministers over at the SCLC and put them at the head of the largest predominantly black church organization in the world, it would be simple for them to then weaponize black Christians. The idea was for Taylor to lay the groundwork to be eventually succeeded by King, who at the time was the vice president of the Sunday school wing of the National Baptist Convention.
A letter from King to the Reverend Tom Kilgore Jr. Dear Tom, we must move Dr. Jackson in Philadelphia next year. It can be done through an organized effort. Philadelphia is a good setting, and the time is right. We must get behind the man and do the job. That man is Gardner Taylor. Very sincerely yours, Martin L. King, Jr.
In 1961, the annual Baptist Convention was held at the Municipal Auditorium in Kansas City, Missouri. Jackson won his bid for re-election at the convention, and as a result of this, a group of outsiders led by Taylor attempted to rush the podium. Members of the convention attempted to stop the stampede, and that is when a shoving match broke out.
He starts a fight on the convention floor, trying to take over the convention for the civil rights movement, kills a preacher on the floor.
A.G. Wright had fallen off the platform, fractured his skull, and died. Jackson didn't so much fault Taylor as he faulted King. He believed that King was the mastermind behind what happened, because those tactics were the same tactics he saw being used by King in the civil rights movement and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference outside of the convention.
After this tragic incident, a committee within the convention voted to remove King from his post as the vice president of the Sunday school wing of the National Baptist Convention.
After King and his contingent got kicked out of the National Baptist Convention, they would have started their own convention, the Progressive National Baptist Convention. It still exists today.
It is the one Baptist national organization that clearly, unmistakably supported our civil rights movement.
Planned Parenthood. Don't you know there's other things that Planned Parenthood offers? It's not just abortion, it's women's health care.
I mean, they believe in LGBT, abortion.
I don't have the right to tell people what to do with their body.
It's an apostate organization.
From here, the deviation and heresy only intensified, with 51 so-called pastors coming together in 1966, taking out a full-page ad in the New York Times, advocating for what they called a Black Power statement, which King privately supported. The statement evoked a counter-response from more conservative ministers like Joseph H. Jackson, which then prompted the press to pester King to see where he stood on the matter.
King's rhetoric was a bit more radical. Levison would have to tell King to temper it down, to stay focused.
I have a brief statement that I will read, and this statement will be passed out later, and then we'll open for questions.
Although he wanted to come out in public support of the statement, he was advised by Stanley to take the more Hegelian approach, saying that while he agrees with the core tenets of the statement, he's against division within the civil rights movement.
There can be no reconciliation with masters as long as they are masters. No reconciliation as long as men are in prison.
3 years later, James Cone released his book, Black Theology and Black Power, which he claims was a merging of the philosophies of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X.
The Christian task is to rebel against all masters, destroying their pretensions to authority and ridiculing the symbols of power.
James Cone was a proponent of the notion that Jesus is black and is an advocate for social justice. Joseph H. Jackson lived long enough to see this iteration of heresy within the so-called black church, and of course spoke out against it.
Jesus Christ is not known by his color. In these days of colorphobia, many men and some scholars have tried to make Jesus Christ colored. And some have objected to him because they say he's white. But he's above that. He transcends color. It is a quality of life that he represents.
While the strategy to subvert the black church by infiltrating the National Baptist Convention was unsuccessful, the media would spend the last quarter of the 20th century popularizing Dr. King, while at the same time tarnishing the reputation of Dr. J.H. Jackson. The city of Chicago even went so far as to rename the street where Joseph H. Jackson's church is located to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. The civil rights industry, which was created in the wake of Dr. King, focused exclusively on political solutions, entirely neglecting the self-inflicted harm that an ever-degrading black culture was embracing. Rather than succumbing to this trend, Jackson continued to stand firm until the day that he died.
As president of an organization of 5 million Negroes, I ought to be challenging Negroes to do something instead of whining about what the white man has. What kind of leader would I be if I walked around with a program for white people in my pocket while neglecting Negroes? I believe in fighting for civil rights, but I believe in Negroes having a sense of responsibility too. We will be the most tragic race on earth if we do not work to accumulate something for ourselves. Joseph Harrison Jackson, 1961.
He says he represents the Negro. He does not represent anybody but himself. He is looking for security. That's what our elders are looking for. But we do not want security.
Young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. Some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals, and many of the values of so-called white middle-class society are values that need to be reviewed and re-evaluated, and in a real sense, they need to be changed. So I think the young people in the Negro community who are raising these questions are raising some very profound questions about our total society. In other words, they are saying that there must be a restructuring of the architecture of our society.